The United States says it's planning out next steps for Venezuela after the capture of the country's leader over the weekend.
Step one is the stabilization of the country. We don't want it descending into chaos. We are in the midst right now and, in fact, about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates, not at the discounts Venezuela was getting. That money will then be handled in such a way that we will control how it is dispersed in a way that benefits the Venezuelan people.
Joining me now is the former U.S. Ambassador to Venezuela, Charles Shapiro. Ambassador Shapiro, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Great. Thanks for inviting me.
Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said there's a three-step plan for stability, recovery, and then transition for Venezuela. Does that seem feasible to you?
At least they've got a plan. It wasn't obvious until now that they even had one. All this seems very risky to me. They've taken a dictatorship, gotten rid of the dictator, and left the other people in place that were the supporters of the dictator. They're still there. They're still arresting journalists on the streets of Caracas. So how this works out is going to be very, very complicated and very risky.
The leadership questions remain, obviously. The Trump administration has accepted that Delcy Rodriguez will remain in power, but they believe within their control, apparently on the advice of the intelligence agencies, that this was the most sure way to preserve some stability. But then you have Maria Corina Machado says she should be leading Venezuela. Venezuelans seem to want her. How do you see it?
Look, she's the most popular politician in the country now. Her party, they disqualified, the Supreme Court said she couldn't run for president, so she chose a retired diplomat with more charisma than I have to run in her place, and he got 70% of the vote. So 70% of the people support the opposition. It sure strikes me that there's got to be some, look, when you have a unexpected transition like this, you've got to work it out. I mean, my idea that I've been promoting, and I don't know if anybody's taking it up, is to get together a group of people who are above politics, who've got the respect of everybody, maybe get them outside of the country, 5, 6 people. They've got to negotiate a timeline with steps. How do we do this? How do we move from what right now is a dictatorship and continues to be a dictatorship, with the U.S. claiming that we're in charge, to a democracy where Venezuelans are making decisions about Venezuela, not Marco Rubio?
Well, on that, because President Trump keeps saying that we are in charge, we being the White House, the United States, they've received sort of an offering of 30 to 50 million barrels of oil they're going to sell on international markets, $2 to $3 billion worth of oil, you know, if they get sort of the going rate. He has talked about oil more than he has talked about transition and talked about democracy. When you look at the national security strategy his government published back in November, it talks about dominating the Western Hemisphere and getting control of strategic resources, of which oil would be a part of it. I mean, what do you think the real motivation is here? Is it the narco-terrorism allegations? Is it oil? Is it just getting rid of a person that they saw as an irritant in President Maduro?
Wow, that's a great question. Look, the national security strategy that came out, what, a month ago, maybe?
Yeah.
Essentially describes this, and it describes a world where great powers dominate, where we return to the 19th century concept of spheres of influence, all the stuff that was so boring when you and I were in history class about dividing up Africa and French and UK and Germany doing this, that, and the other. I mean, that's what this is returning to, and I find that very ominous. I see it ominous in Greenland. I see it ominous for Canada and all these, you know, the United States should annex Canada. I mean, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. Ominous for Panama, ominous for any country in the world who's the president or prime minister of those countries where drugs are coming from those countries to the United States. It is giving us the self-proclaimed authority to deal with these issues.
The president says he expects oil firms operating in Venezuela to be up and going in about 18 months. We spoke with Ben Rosewell, who's Canada's former ambassador to Venezuela, and we talked to others in the oil sector who are highly skeptical of that. I mean, as someone who was posted in that country and has seen it firsthand, I mean, is the security, the stability, do the conditions even remotely exist to allow that sort of a timeline to be feasible?
Oil companies are not charitable organizations.
Hmm.
I've seen experts say that it would take $10 billion a year over a minimum
Yeah.
over 10 years to recuperate the oil industry in Venezuela. I mean, it's, pipelines, wells, pumps, refineries that have been allowed to decay for 25 years now, where the government took the money. Since the government owns the Venezuelan oil company, the government's been taking the money from the oil company that should have gone into reinvestment and used it to spend on social programs. So then you've got the question is, presumably talking about ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, are they willing to spend that kind of money? Are there not better investments somewhere else in the world where you get a better return on investment? I've talked to a oil expert earlier this week who said that the United States is working a deal so that whatever is invested in Venezuela will be taxed at a lower rate and will make more money. Are we doing that? It's all very complicated, and I think there's no guarantees that it's going to work. And the U.S. Department of Energy doesn't sell oil. The U.S. Department of Energy doesn't drill for oil, and so these people are somehow going to have the ability to market oil on the world market. I'd be a little skeptical about that.
Look, just a final question. There's not a lot of people shedding tears for Nicolas Maduro after what happened, but there is a lot of concern about the way it was done because of what a lot of that legal experts see as a violation of international law. Since then and before then, the president has mused quite openly about seizing Greenland, the territory of a NATO ally. Canada was talked about as the 51st state. Colombia and Mexico were put on notice, essentially, by the president. And then there's Cuba, Iran, Nigeria. It doesn't end. And Stephen Miller has talked about the real politics of the world, that force and power is what rules, and that's going to be the approach. So how far do you think this administration is prepared to go in its resurrection and expansion of the Monroe Doctrine?
Look, our grandfathers, the victors in World War II, worked like crazy, having experienced the war, to build a system where international commerce and international relations operated in a rule-based system. Because they had experienced the Second World War, they knew what the alternative was. And that's what Stephen Miller wants to return to. That is the world before the Second World War. I think that's very dangerous, very risky. At the very least, how much goodwill has the United States burned up in Canada, in Denmark, in Europe, among our allies? Not a single one of our allies. I mean, typically, if there was something like this, we'd be asking you right now, can you help us put together the Venezuelan school system? Can you help us bring in people who are experts, from Alberta who can work, all that sort of thing. And I guarantee you, Canada has no intention of helping out because this was unilateral action by the United States without consultation with our allies, let alone consultation with our own Congress.
Yeah, it's 2026 is off to a heck of a start. Charles Shapiro, it was good to meet you. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks, David.